Hello and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. We're all about the kids this week. Later in the show we'll explore the gap between the promotion of unhealthy foods with toys and cartoons and the celebrity chefs who urge kids and parents towards healthy eating. But first, last week we noted TV news fondness for screening and re-screening endlessly disturbing videos of school bullying. The New Zealand Herald pitched in with "Crime Shock, New Zealand's Little Thugs." A fully fledged media narrative could only have one result: the Prime Minister assuring the country that something would be done.
It's schoolyard attacks like this that have spurred the government into taking action.
We need to understand what happens when bullying gets out of control, and that is, taken to the extreme, some youngsters take their own lives. And I'm not going to sit back and let that happen without at least trying to improve the environment.
Furthermore, the Minister of Education, Anne Tolley, dusted off a long-shelved request from school principals for guidance on searching pupils and even bid up by promising new laws to that effect. But does the urgent, anecdotally driven nature of the news make for good policy? And have we been in a moral panic? I'm joined now by Dr. John Langley, a member of the Ministry of Social Development Advisory Board preparing a series of reports on children with conduct problems, and Victoria University Media Studies lecturer, Dr. Peter Thompson. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Bullying is all over the news at the moment. Surely that's a good thing, gets it on the agenda?
Well, it's a good thing as long as some good comes out of it. I think a distinction can be drawn between what is good reporting that goes in and that describes the wider problem, and it is a wider problem, as opposed to perhaps just playing the same clips over and over and over again. Because in the case of the latter, you can actually get a panic reaction from those that make policy and those that implement it.
Do you think that's what we've seen?
Oh, I think we've seen it for years. I mean, typically what's happened over the last 20 years is that there'll be an incident, an ugly scene, like a kid will hit a teacher, or somebody else will bring a knife to school, or there'll be a bullying incident. And typically the response to that is there'll be an immediate call to arms, questions in the house, and suddenly there'll be a band-aid solution promoted that generally is useless. And then it passes until the next incident occurs. And I think what that does is it overshadows the need for a longer term and much more systematic and comprehensive solution to the problem.
Is there the mounting crisis that we've seen depicted, most notably in the Herald, but across various media?
It's hard to say whether it's mounting. I mean, in New Zealand, we have probably in excess of 40,000 children and young people in our schools that could be described as having conduct problems. At the top end of that are the kids that engage in violent behaviour, aggressive behaviour, and make their lives and the lives of others pretty miserable all round. They have been there for a long time. I think what's changed over the last decade is the fact that the kind of behaviours we're seeing now are more violent. And for example, if you look at youth offending in New Zealand, it hasn't increased in 10 years, despite the media coverage. What has increased is the proportion of violent offending that's occurred. So it's at the upper end, the dangerous end of the behaviours where the increase
We've seen the same thing in adult crime statistics too, haven't we?
Yes, indeed we have. Yeah.
Peter, why do you think this has been so big this time round on the news agenda? Is it basically because there are pictures to go with it?
I think that's certainly part of the equation, Russell, yeah. I think it's a classic issue attention cycle, though, where very deep structural social problems actually get replayed over time, and typically there's a critical event that propels it into media coverage, and followed by a great deal of hand-wringing angst, from various authorities and public figures and schools and society at large. And then, of course, we see, as we've seen just now, the Prime Minister on TV very, very seriously saying, well, this is a terrible thing and we have to do something about it because it's election year. And subsequently, there may be some symbolic gestures towards new policies, typically throwing the issue back at the schools without actually funding solutions to the problem. And then the issue will be forgotten for a year or two until it reappears.
Can you blame the news media, though? Because, I mean, it's a hard-worthy topic to sell unless you have those pictures, and they've gone with the pictures.
Oh, well, if you're trying to run the news media to make money, well, it makes sense to go with what shocks and titillates, and those images shocked and titillated repeatedly. Having said that, I don't think the news media are inventing the issue. There is a problem. It does need to be resolved, and I'm certainly not making light of that, you know, in the sense that because the media have amplified our concerns, there is nothing to be concerned about. I wouldn't agree with that.
What do you make of the contention in the Herald story, which, to be fair, really doesn't seem to have much evidence in the story to back it up, that it's violent TV to blame?
Oh, I think this is
even as they show violent videos.
Again, a rerun of this very, very long-standing assumption that the media are somehow responsible for all the ills in society. Now, I think you have to be very, very careful about how we go about examining that kind of proposition. It's certainly not a simple causal relationship where children watch media or get involved in video games or even chatting on the internet or using cell phones, and all of a sudden they're transformed into these dysfunctional antisocial monsters that will grow up to become recidivist criminals. You know, I think the media is very, very good at taking 2 and 2 and coming up with a sum of 27.5 on those issues. It simply isn't that simple. However, there is statistical evidence that the media do play a role in facilitating models of behaviour that may be dysfunctional amongst some social groups.
I should go to John on that, because this is precisely what you're studying. I mean, what do you make of that, the idea that it's the media diet that's causing it?
I think the evidence around that is very shaky. A lot of the evidence that has been compiled in recent years is that if people, or children or young people, have a predisposition towards violent behaviour, then watching violent videos or violent movies may exacerbate that. But there's no reason and there's no evidence to assume that somebody who is normally socialised, normally developing kid is suddenly going to become an ex-murderer on the strength of watching a nasty video. It's very, very thin, and it's a very, very easy thing to do, to say that because of what's shown on television, this happens. I mean, if that was the case, and if it had that level of influence, then 2/3 of the population would be running amok, actually.
Absolutely.
At the moment, we only have a certain percentage that's running amok, but it's nothing like 2/3.
Is there a danger that I mean, as Peter indicated, this is probably going to be off the news agenda in a week's time. It's had 3 weeks. That we'll just go back to where we were, and there is no real attention paid to long-term projects. I mean, Chris Carter, I thought, had a point. He said, well, we had an anti-bullying strategy. It got defunded by the new government. Do you have any confidence that this will be followed up?
Yeah, I do. This time, I've been working in this field for about 20-odd years. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I've seen a change in attitude of the last government and certainly this government. And it's in 2 areas. One is they finally recognise that if we're going to deal with this problem, we have to define it properly, we have to identify what works in terms of intervention, and we have to prepare the ground to ensure that it does work. And the second thing is to make sure that agencies that are involved in this actually work together. I mean, New Zealand, not only in this area but in others, has one of the most fragmented governance systems in the world. If you think about, you know, the boards of trustees in schools, district health boards and the like. I mean, we've got one for almost every sort of little part of the country.
I wonder if we should also acknowledge that there are good news stories, there are success stories. I mean, I have to say, every time I read these stories, I think, well, my kids went through school in an environment that was much safer than the one I experienced. The peer mediators in the playground, it worked. There's
some excellent programs around that are run in schools and run very effectively. I think the problem is that there's huge variety in that. One of the things that I would advocate is that schools that actually are successful in dealing with these issues and successful in keeping difficult kids in school should actually be rewarded. Often at the moment they're punished, because if they do a good job they get more. And the schools that get rewarded are the ones that beat their chests and say, we don't put up with this, and they send the kid down the road to somebody else to deal with. And so the incentives are all in the wrong places. And I think you're right. I think we know what works. There are many schools that do what works, and they should be rewarded for their efforts.
Well, hopefully, perhaps even we might see the news lead one night with a good news story on this. John Langley and Peter Thompson, thank you very much for your time. Next up, the media's mixed message on kids and healthy eating.